Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we're recording it for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tom Temin, host and managing editor of Federal Drive on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Bill Zielinski, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for IT Category Management at the General Services Administration. Todd Simpson is Chief Information Officer at the Food and Drug Administration. And Dave McComber, Executive Vice President of Public Sector and Federal Sales at QTS. Gentlemen, great to have you with us today. And I want to begin with what might be a basic question, but we ask it a lot because the cloud landscape, the cloud adoption models at agencies are always changing. So I guess why don't we start with you, Bill? GSA has a government-wide view of what's going on with cloud, and you're responsible for a lot of it. Where are agencies now that they've gotten email out of the way?
Thanks for having us join you today. I like that you said after they've gotten email out of the way, and I will say that agencies are struggling with that idea of how do they really, in a furtive sort of way, adopt cloud technologies. You know, it's one thing to find those kind of freestanding, low-hanging, brand new sorts of things to put in, quote unquote, the cloud. But when you really start talking about constituting your IT enterprise with a significant portion of being cloud, they're struggling, and part of those struggles come from kind of just an understanding fundamentally of what does it mean to move to cloud. They're struggling with understanding the security requirements and how those translate over to a cloud instantiation, the consumption model itself, how do they really pay for cloud, giving the requirements that we have. So from that perspective, we see folks are kind of all over the place in what they're doing. They all have a cloud adoption strategy of some sort as they're required to, but in terms of where they begin, how they get started, and how they really make that meaningful switch, there's a lot of struggles out there. And so we've kind of jumped in with both feet to set up a Cloud Center of Excellence to where we can really try to help agencies not only match with others who've begun that journey and made progress, but also putting together, if you will, cookbooks or easy buttons that allow them to kind of understand a little bit further and get down the road a little bit further.
And Dave, looking at this from your perspective across government, and also you see what industry is doing too, and it's probably safe to say that no new company builds a data center at all, whereas legacy companies can't wait to get out of their data centers for cloud.
Well, new companies like QTS do build data centers, but I want to pick up on something that you said. I think that from a cloud perspective, the easy stuff has already been moved to the cloud, right? The easy stuff and the new stuff has moved to the cloud. But when you look at the federal government, a lot of the IT applications have been there an awful long time. And a lot of them have to be rewritten to be able to take advantage of the cloud, and that is the daunting task I think a lot of these agencies are facing. There's a lot of interdependencies between platforms, whether it's the servers, the storage, the OSs, and those types of things. And simply saying we're going to take this entire environment that's been protecting the borders or been doing this function or that function and porting it up to AWS sounds easy, or AWS or Microsoft sounds easy, but there's a lot of devil in those details. And I think that people have tried to move some things. It hasn't worked. They've had to move them back. So more and more, the word hybrid is being mentioned, right? There's certain things that are going to be purpose-built and perfect for the cloud, but there's some things that are going to remain on-prem. And I think that one of the things that we're starting to see that now is that on-prem does not necessarily have to be in a government data center. On-prem could also be in a commercial data center because we can provide the same levels of security and support and those things that the government is used to. So I think the whole world is changing, and I think that when you have a cloud conversation, it's a very deep conversation, and you really need to start at what are the goals, what are the objectives, what are the architectures, and really lay out a plan.
We're hearing more federal CIOs of large departments say that let's just face the fact that we're going to have hybrid for a long time to come because we do have these legacy applications that we can't migrate. So just a detailed question then, if you are rehosting, say, in a commercial data center and there are probably a lot of good reasons to do that versus your own, and it is an old legacy application, what is the technical or functional difference between cloud and somebody else's commercial data center? for purposes of hosting, say, a legacy application?
Well, I think that, so when you look at what you're trying to achieve with cloud, right, you're trying to gain efficiencies, you're trying to be able to scale, and ultimately I think you're trying to reduce costs, right? And time again, what we're seeing is that the people that do this on a regular basis, like QTS from a commercial perspective, can provide some of those cost advantages that maybe you can't achieve in a federal data center and that sort of thing. So at the end of the day, if we can provide the same level of support and service, the same level of security, the same level of innovation and application scaling at a cheaper cost, it's something that I think the federal government is getting more and more comfortable with as budgets get shrunk and the challenges that you're facing from an overall cost perspective.
Okay, and Todd, your FDA is an agency that's going through a lot of change. In fact, there's a almost reinventing FDA bill that has to be carried out. Congress is changing what FDA is doing. Plus, you've been on a journey to migrate a legacy IT environment to keep up with the 21st century, drug and medical device and so on, regulated industry that you serve. So give us your state of affairs right now.
So you definitely got it right. It has been a transformational journey for the last 24 months. And in the last 24 months, we have had a lot of successes with the cloud. We've stood up a hybrid cloud model, leveraging both a public and private cloud. We've stood up a cloud brokerage service. We have a cloud advisory board that is on a workflow for any piece of software or any system that possibly may be developed. We evaluate it against its cloud readiness. And we're very methodical about it because we don't want to get caught in some kind of a trend where we're just putting things in the cloud to be trendy. We want the things in the cloud to be in the cloud to get the biggest bang for the buck. And so this has caused a shift in our entire business model because now we actually have 6 different cloud service providers that are providing platform, software, and infrastructure as a service. And when you look at the platform and software as a service, then you have to start thinking about your microservices from a development standpoint. And it allows you, it gives you a lot of leverage to basically reinvent yourself from a development standpoint. So instead of just thinking about that on-premise in-house development that you typically would have done maybe with Java or some other language, now you have these other lines of development that are available to you, like Salesforce and SharePoint and Appian and many others. And so you have to think more broadly in terms of the types of solutions that are available to you, but you have a lot more choices at your disposal.
Tell us more about the Cloud Advisory Board. Who's on it? I mean, what types of functions are on it, and what do they do?
So my Cloud Advisory Board is headed by my CTO and a small team that he has put together. It's not a bureaucratic body. It's just basically when we're doing our business case on any new development, we go through an evaluation process, and as part of that business case, we just need to make sure that makes sense, that the cloud strategy makes sense. We haven't moved our mail to the cloud yet. We're one of those agencies that's still getting ready to, and we're going to be doing it.
So you're an Active Directory hugger.
We are, and we're actually getting ready to move to Office 216 and the mail in the cloud, but not until later this year. We've had a lot more successes with more practical cloud type projects like our infant formula tracking system, and just there's been a lot of smaller wins that have built a lot of confidence in our ability to provide services in the cloud.
And also, if you would tell us about the cloud brokerage service. Is that something within FDA also?
Yeah, so the cloud brokerage service pretty much sits under what we call the cloud access security broker. And we have both a security broker and an access broker. And it's basically the mechanisms that we use not only to allow the inlets into the cloud, so our scientists, our customers can now self-provision. And when they're doing their self-provisioning, they're using that brokerage model to self-provision. The security brokerage model is basically watching the traffic that's occurring between the cloud and the FDA.
Okay, good. So a pretty sophisticated approach then.
I like to think so. It works well for us.
I want to go ahead.
The prior administration had DCOI and FITARA. How important are those initiatives now and going forward with your plans? Are they a big part of what you're looking at in and doing, and also from a GSA perspective, I'd like your perspective too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So FITARA is the vein of my existence, and I work in a federated environment where my centers have budget authority. So I'm bringing standard governance and centralized governance to the FDA so that we don't have multiple venues into the cloud. We have to have a technology roadmap. And so those pathways that I described for the microservices, if we don't establish those, everyone will bleed out in multiple directions and we'll just have chaos. There won't ever be a success, getting everyone on the same sheet of music. So FITARA has been instrumental in bringing that governance in. And as far as consolidating our data centers, I am a big fan of leveraging the cloud. But before you can leverage the cloud, you have to have that cloud brokerage service model in place so that you have that foundation so you can start deciding what applications make the most sense there and so on. So I haven't closed any data centers at the FDA, but I'm always talking about closing a data center at the FDA, and when we're ready, we'll make the right moves. But
scorecards last year were pretty popular, right?
Yes.
I mean,
If you do close a data center, think of how much you'll ease parking at the FDA campus. But you mentioned a couple of times microservices. Just give us a sense of what those are, and then we'll go to Bill.
Okay, so the microservices, and I try to stay vendor agnostic, but I don't know if I can do it when I'm describing, so the Jenkins, the GitHubs, the different venues out there for how you would do that agile development.
All right, good.
Just what I want to start with is just kind of framing out some piece of FITARA. What's interesting is with FITARA in December of 2014, it really moved from that idea of data center consolidation, which Todd just hit on, to data center optimization. So I actually think that it did provide some room to change what the target folks were chasing. And I think that was a good thing, because instead of saying I need to close and achieve some number, it really allows for folks to take a look at what are we trying to get done here. And that entire approach that Todd talked about in terms of who are we, what are we trying to do, how are we going to get there, what are the right things to do, and putting governance in place helps them to come to those conclusions. And then we'll figure out the approach that gets us there. We can optimize. That doesn't necessarily mean closure. So I think that was a good thing. I think the danger comes in if with something like FITARA, if you start setting the targets in such a way that it's too prescriptive, then folks don't get that chance to look at it from a business perspective. I do want to hit on one thing both of you hit, though, was there are a lot of folks from our perspective that we're seeing that are saying we're going to move to the cloud, and what they really have done is they may have shut down a data center or some piece of a data center and simply rehosted to a cloud environment. So they've taken their entire application stack, just turned it over into a cloud environment, but they basically are using the cloud service provider like a data center, and all of those qualities, the elasticity, the scalability, ability to control costs, those things are all lost. And unfortunately, you hear members of Todd, your community saying, we tried that and we're not getting the benefits that have been claimed from it. So, what we always try to encourage folks to do is to do that legwork up front, to find those small victories, to start with pilots, to learn from what others have done before they start to make large-scale changes, because if not, they're in danger of simply rehosting and buying the same set of problems in a different environment.
And you mentioned, too, the elasticity and the ability to grow and shrink your workload. That's a big quality of cloud that makes it not like a data center where you have pretty much fixed assets that you have to optimize or run, even if you're not using them, or run them at low capacity utilization rates. And so for cloud providers, how does that idea of elasticity map against single tenancy that some agencies try to get from a cloud provider? Because that would seem like if you say, well, I want a cloud and all the qualities of it, but I want to be the only tenant for whatever reason, then you've got a data center again.
Yeah, exactly. And so we do see that with folks, but I can't remember which of you talked about the sensitivities and understanding and knowing which business you're trying to carve out look at, right? And I think that's going to help drive the requirements for which model that you're going to use and employ. I do think that what we are seeing from the cloud service providers themselves is a couple of different things. You do see the rise of a lot more entities trying to become brokerage services who are saying to you, we'll promise you a set of cloud service providers on the back end, we'll provide that brokerage to you where we can simply you provide those requirements, we help with that. That elasticity is not just for scaling necessarily, but you also have things like business continuity and disaster recovery and your ability to kind of move and shift as there are demands in your business or exigencies of business as well. So you see that one with the brokerage model, but what we're also seeing is that those larger cloud service providers have gained a much better understanding of this federal marketplace and have begun to look at the idea that, well, if you don't want to be mixed in with everybody else, with the non-governmental types, within our infrastructure, we're going to build out facilities that they're still going to be multi-tenant, but they're going to be governmental entities that are housed there, and therefore they're going to be subject to the same kind of rules of engagement and compliancy rules as well. So you're seeing even more models of delivery that are springing up based upon this further understanding of the federal marketplace.
To what you were saying before, the elasticity that you're talking about obviously exists within the major CSPs and cloud providers, but I also think that the data centers can provide that as well, right? Because in your FDA data center, you have to cover all of the costs of all the people, the entire cost of the entire building, the power for the entire building, whether you're using it or not, right? In a commercial data center provider space, you pay for the power you're using when you use it, you pay for the space you're using, the cooling that you're using, and as you grow, it gets bigger, and as you shrink, it gets smaller. So you are able to achieve that elasticity that you might not be able to do in one of your own data centers, right?
And an aspect that hits us in the federal space often is that idea that projecting those costs over time, because you have refreshment cycles for your hardware, because you have the ups and downs in your budget, you don't have that predictability from year to year, whereas you go to more of this fuller service model, managed service model, you can start to flatten some of those out.
All right, that's a good place to take a break on. Our guests today are Todd Simpson, the CIO at the Food and Drug Administration. Dave McComber is Executive Vice President for Public Sector and Federal Sales at QTS. And Bill Zielinski, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for IT Category Management at the General Services Administration. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is Navigating Cloud Choices in Government, sponsored by QTS here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.